Leah May Sipe Fox in her home, February 9th, 1982. The interviewer is Susan Gortner. Where was your father born?
My father was born in Decatur, Illinois. That's not very far from Monticello.
And your mother?
My mother was born in Charleston, Illinois.
What type of work did your father do?
My father had a very well-to-do uncle in Decatur who came to this country from Pennsylvania and established a tile factory. At that time, this country needed tiling. The farms, would flood and all, and so tiling was a very fine occupation at that time. And this uncle had a tile factory in Decatur, and I hate to say it, but he became quite wealthy. So my father, when he was 16 years old, can you imagine this? This uncle set my father up in business in Atwood, built this tile factory, and that was my father's business. And he married my mother, who had moved to Atwood from Charleston with her parents.
What was your father's name?
My father's name was Robert Clint Sipe.
And your mother's?
Her name was Sarah Anna Merritt.
Do you know how long they attended school?
Well, I just know that my father went to work when he was 16, so I imagine he just finished grade school, very likely. And in those days, I'm quite sure my mother perhaps only went through grade school.
Did your mother ever work outside the home?
No, I don't think she ever did.
Did you grow most of your own food, and what did you grow, and did you help can?
Well, my grandparents and my parents were very, on my father's side, they always had just everything that you could wish for. And my grandfather he would start out in the morning with sort of a wagon that he had, and he'd come home with every kind of produce you could think of, apples and all kinds of produce, that we really never had much right around our home. We never had much gardening, but I know my grandmother did an awful lot of canning and things like that because my grandfather was great my father and mother really were just always had plenty of everything because my grandfather and grandmother, although they lived in Decatur, they eventually moved down to Atwood to be with their only son. My grandmother had 6 children, and my father was the only one who lived beyond a year old. All 5 of those babies passed away before they were...
That's sad, but that was quite common at that time.
At that time, it seemed that babies were taken at such a young age. So naturally, my grandmother was very, very fond because that was her only child. And so we were always a very close-knit family.
How many were there in your family? Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had one brother, 2 years older than I. Mm-hmm.
When your grandparents moved down to Atwood, did they live with you?
No. Well, they built a new home, and I think they did live together for a while, but no, my mother and father had their own home, and we lived on this. We built this home right at the edge of this tile factory that they had, and I know we had a colored man from Tuscola to run they had to have an engine, and they had great long sheds where they put these tile and then they had to be burned. They had great big kilns where they put these tile in there, to harden them. It was quite a process, this tile business.
I get that. So your family never moved from Atwood?
We did not move until That was, see, way back there. We did not move. We moved back to Decatur in 1915. My mother and father, and of course my brother was married, and I don't want to get this wrong, but we moved back to Decatur.
What did your parents stress most as you were growing up, do you think? Hard work, religion, education, or a career?
Well, I had wonderful parents. My husband, who came into the family when we were married in 1917, he thought that he never knew anyone as fine as my mother. She was a most outgoing person and such a wonderful. If I wanted to have a party or anything like that, she was always right there to see that everything went so and so. And I can't exactly say just what, but forgotten now what you asked me.
What they stress the most?
Oh,
religion, a career, education, hard work.
well, in those days, people didn't. Not everyone went to college like they do now, but of course, I started taking music when I was 9 years old, and when I was 16 years old, I started teaching because I had a teacher, and he passed away. A very fine young man that had been away to college and was quite a musician, but he passed away. And before he passed away, he told all of his pupils that I would be the best to teach him. So I started teaching quite young, and I also went into Milligan University every Saturday and spent the whole day at the university taking. I took not from one teacher. I had two of the finest teachers that they had there. So I was so music was really my life. And I have, I still, as you know, I still play and I still enjoy it. But my folks, and now my brother went to a business college. And in those days my folks gave me as much as they felt that they could afford at that time in music, because I went in every day, or every week to the university. Some days I used to go in on a freight train. They had a caboose on the end of it, and the train wouldn't maybe go in earlier some of the times, and I'd go in the morning in that caboose, and clear into Decatur on that. Oh, the times were so different then, than they are now.
How long did it take you to get into Decatur?
Well, it was not too long. I mean, I think the trains maybe went as fast as, not as fast as, but a freight train, kind of jogs around. But I'd get in there by say 10 o'clock in the morning, and then it seems as I remember that there was an evening train that I could take back in the evening. But I was quite young when I did that. And I would go to this uncle's of my father's, to their beautiful home. There was a time when their home was considered the finest in Decatur, so they were well-to-do people. And I always went there when I got into Decatur. I was too young to be downtown looking around at which now I'd be shopping and be looking. But I'd go to there, and I'd always have a little morning lunch. I can remember I was so fond of red raspberry jam, and she would always had homemade bread. She had a maid who was an excellent cook, and she always had sort of warm homemade bread with red raspberry jam.
That sounds good.
Doesn't that sound good?
Yes.
But my people, they were not the most religious people in the world, but they were good, substantial people, and I started playing at the Methodist Church when I was just so young, and my cousin used to visit me from Burlington, Iowa, and she said, Leah, every time the bell rings, you rush down to that church. And I did. I played for the Epworth League and the services, and I know when I left Atwood, they were so very lovely to me at the church, and they gave me gifts, and I guess I was kind of conceited. I thought, well, this town will fold up without me, but it didn't. It went right on.
When did you first discover that music was your great interest?
Well, I started, as I say, when I was 9, taking lessons, and I got a little careless about practicing, and my mother said, now we'll stop the lessons, and whenever you feel like you want to practice, why, you may start again. And I just, in another year, I was ready to, and so I was that was my 9 when I started. And I quit for one summer, and then that was back again. I don't know, I've always enjoyed it.
What instruments do you play?
Well, I just play piano and organ, and when I was, as I say, living in Atwood, we organized a girls' band, and we had an instructor who was really married to one of my cousins, and we had all the instruments. We had uniforms, and we did a lot of playing, and I played clarinet in those days, and it was unusual for girls in those days for girls to have a band, drummers and cornets and trombones and all those things. But it was a lot of fun, just a lot of fun.
It sounds like it would.
It was so different. We played around at different towns, and they'd have picnics and things. And 4th of July was a big day for us. And I can remember the cemetery, it's quite a ways out of town, and on Decoration Day, we marched from downtown, and by the time we'd get out there, we were all pretty warm, because that was on 4th of July. I can't think that my life was unusual, but I had really a very fine life, and the young people of today might not think that it was so exciting, but in those days it was quite exciting.
It sounds like you did lots of interesting things.
I did, and if I say it myself, I had a lot of boyfriends.
Well, that's nice too.
See, we weren't too far from Tuscola and Arthur, and I had a good life. I had a lot of fun in my early days.
How did you meet your husband?
That's the most interesting thing. Well, as I say, I moved to Decatur, and of course I was always interested in music, and I didn't want to teach anymore because I was new in Decatur, and Decatur was so much larger than I'd been used to, town size. So I joined the Musicians Union professionally, and right away I was busy, and you see, we were playing then for banquets and dances, and I did play some in the Methodist Church there. They had an orchestra, but one night I was called what we call a pickup orchestra. We weren't a regular orchestra, and so I was called to play with a group of 5. And when I went up to this hall, I don't know whether you know where the Mason Music Company is in Decatur, but this was upstairs above this, and there was to be a dance. And when I got up there, there's just the cornet player was there. Of course, I knew him. I said, "Who's on violin tonight?" See, they don't use violins now so much in dance orchestras, but then violin was the first, the piano, drums, violin, cornet, trombone. And he says, "Well, there's a new fellow in town. He hasn't been here from Germany too long." I said, "Oh, is that so? He's going to be on violin tonight." Well, pretty soon, as I tell it, here came this tall, handsome, dark-haired man with a violin under his arm. Well, of course, this fellow introduced me to him, and he looked at me like this, and I looked at him, and we said, "How do you do?" We played the dance. I don't think he ever looked at me again. And I didn't see him again for months, maybe 6 months. Then they decided to have an orchestra in one of the theaters. The Empress Theater it was. And when I went to rehearsal for that, here was this violinist. And I kind of liked to look at him. And the funny part of it was, I was going with another fellow, and every evening after we met at the Emerson Piano House downtown for rehearsals. Every time when we were through, here came this guy that I was going with. And I thought, oh, if he wouldn't come, maybe this Mr. Fox might ask. We lived in an apartment close to downtown. Well, finally, it was Christmas came, and this other fellow I was going with asked me to their home. He had 2 sisters, both teachers in schools. Well, I went to this house, but after we'd had our dinner or lunch or whatever it was, I said, I don't think I'm going to see you tonight. And I had hoped, and in the meantime, this Mr. Fox had called me up and asked if he could come over. So I let this other fellow. That was the trouble with me in my younger days. I was so fickle that I was always looking for a different one. Some felt.
Well, it sounds like you made the right choice, though, with that.
After 64 years, it sounds like it, doesn't it? I hope that all didn't go over this, because that's beside the point. I'm sure you're not interested in.
So really, when you started working almost as a young teenager, playing for people.
Yes, I did. I really did. I started quite young.
Did your brother work too, doing some other things when he was growing up?
Well, my brother was he was a drummer. I mean, he and I used to play just piano and drums occasionally for dances at night, if maybe over at Arthur or someplace around where we lived.
Did he go to work in the tile company?
No, he wasn't old enough really to work in that. After so many years of the tile business, I think maybe perhaps my father had supplied all the farmers around with tile. My father sold that business before my brother was old enough to have worked in anything like that, because that was really. But I can remember as a little girl, this colored man that came from Tuscola. He moved his family there to run the engine for this tile factory. This old colored man. Oh, this is something I must tell you, which really was terrible. This old colored man, he would come over to our home and sit on the side of the porch and I would get on his back and he would rock me and he'd sing to me. And he never went downtown that he didn't bring me candy. And listen, when I was older, we had this girl band. We went to Tuscola to play a concert. We were up on the stage. In the meantime, this is years later, you see, this colored man had moved back to Tuscola. He came up to the bandstand and said, "Is there a girl on here named Leah Sipe?" And I said, tell him no, because he was a poor old colored man. Wasn't that cruel? I think that was one of the worst things that I ever did.
And he didn't recognize you?
Oh, he didn't. It was kind of dark up there, and he couldn't see very well. And I've never forgiven myself for that. I think that was cruel. As sweet as he's been to me in my early days.
It sounds like you were his sweetheart when you were little.
Well, I was just a little bit of a thing then. My parents were very considerate. I can remember when my father went to Decatur and came home with a pony and cart for my brother and I. And it was darling, the sweetest pony, and we were just little tots. We had big hats, and my mother said when we'd get in that cart with these great big hats showing from the back, the that we were the cutest things. That they just so. And if there wasn't anything that I ever wished for and would beg for that I didn't get, my father was pretty good, and I always hoped that my father would go shopping with me because anything I wanted, I always got. And Mother wasn't quite so lenient; she wasn't quite so free with. But I can't think of anything particular that. My father was very public-minded. He liked sports. He was always managed the ball teams and anything that was sport. He at one time had just because he thought that the young people needed something, he had a skating rink. And then,
in Atwood?
In Atwood, way back. And the skates then, had to clamp on your shoes. Now they have the shoes, you see. But and then later on he had a little picture show. He thought that the town needed something like that. So he was very public-spirited.
Did he have his grocery store in Atwood?
Yes, after he had sold, he and a friend of his bought this grocery store, I think for some place to loaf more than anything else, of course. But he did have this grocery store, but he didn't have it very long. My father was never, he had a farm he bought a farm, and but money wasn't the main thing in his life. He really wasn't, some people are so, that's all they live for, but he was really more to lead a rather easy life. Mm-hmm. Although he worked quite hard but he accumulated enough that he and Mother lived very comfortably.
So when you moved back to Decatur, then did you live in an apartment by yourself or with another girl?
Oh, no.
You lived with
No,
your
Mother
folks
and Dad,
still?
we all moved back.
You all
This
moved back.
This well-to-do uncle
Uh-huh.
was so fond of my father that he said he owned some apartments. And he says, if you come back and live in Decatur, you can live in one of the apartments. So that's where we moved, into one of these apartments that he had.
So you lived with your folks until the time you got married?
Yes.
And then when you got married, where did you live?
Well, we bought a little home, or Emil did. My father was always there with the pocketbook. He was always ready to help. And we bought a little home there before we were married. We bought this home, and my dad and Emil worked there. You see, Emil was working as an interior decorator. And we fixed it all up before we were married, bought our furniture. That was don't ever do that, I say to the young people. Because you're kind of confused and you buy things that you wouldn't buy otherwise. I remember our living room was quite small, and we bought furniture that was too heavy for that little room, And that's what we did. We bought a little home, and at that time, my husband was doing interior decorating. He never did any outside work. It was all in churches and some of the finest homes in Decatur. And he worked that in the daytime. He would come home at 6 o'clock, jump out of white overalls into a tuxedo, and go out and play dances. That he worked day and night.
And did you still play with him then?
I didn't play with him. I played with another
You
orchestra.
played with another group.
It was a funny part of it. I worked for a fellow that had an orchestra. His name was Cox, and mine was Fox. And some people thought I was this fellow's wife, and I couldn't stand him because he was so grabby. He'd come up to me and say, they want us to play till 1. Usually we played from 9 to 12. And he would say, how about playing till 1 o'clock? And I'd say, oh, no, I don't want to play another hour. But anything to get that extra $1, maybe that was all right. But to me, I had a new husband, and I didn't want to play.
You'd rather be home.
I'd rather be home.
Well, how long did you court each other?
Well, I met him about a year and a half. We were married I moved to Decatur in 15, and I met him in a few months after I was there. And then we were married in 17.
And then you lived in Decatur for a while.
Then we had bought this little home, and we lived there until about 22. My mother and father had been to California and spent the winter, and they came back. And we owed my dad a little money, and he said, I'll forget that money if you'll go to California with us next winter. So we went to California and spent one winter. We rented our little home out, and we went to California and spent this winter. And we thought we might, because Emil says, I'm not going to hunt any work out there until I've been there some time. He hadn't been there a week till he was down to find out if he could, at the union place where the painters, and he got work right away, and he worked in a great big hotel all the time he was there. He did this fine work where they put gold leaf on the ceilings and all around. It was hard. But he did that all the time he was out there. So we came back with more money, but we decided to stay out there, and so we went hunting for a place to live, and everything that we wanted was too expensive, and the things that we could afford we didn't like. So after the folks had come back to Decatur, and we sent them a telegram that we're coming back. So you often wonder how differently your life would have been if you would have stayed in California. I wonder if it would have been different from what it has been since we're back here.
To backtrack just a little bit, when you went to grade school, was it a one-room grade school in Atwood?
Oh, no. It was, about six rooms.
So how much school did you go to?
Well, I went through the grade school and then through the high school.
And then you began taking your music classes at Millikan.
I went before I was out of school. I went to see him on Saturdays, and I took the music.
So you probably had quite an extraordinary amount of education for that period for a girl, didn't you?
Well, in the music, I'm not too up on other things, but I had a pretty good education, I would say, especially in music, because I took not only piano lessons when I went to Millikan, but I took the different courses that they give, the history and different courses that they had, because I was pretty young, because there's a music building there at Millikan called Corper Hall, and I took of Mr. Corper. The Millikan University had just started, and I remember my father took me to Decatur to find a good teacher, and we had been told of a Miss Clark that was at one of the churches. And somebody said, well, there's a university has a fine music course. So out there, so I was just a little girl really when I started, and I took Mr. Corper and Mr. Baker, one of the main teachers. But just to show you the difference in our lives, when Emil came from Germany, he had played violin in Germany. But when he came here, I better let that be on his story, but he started to work. He couldn't speak a word of English, and he worked at one of the factories at night, $8 a week, and he gave his mother all but $1 he kept. And he took 50 cents of that and went to Millikan and took piano under a student.
What did you do with your earnings when you were growing up?
I spent them.
You just spent them.
I can remember, this is funny. I can remember I charged only 50 cents for a half an hour. That was and I drove in the country. I had an old dolly, a horse, and I drove, and I'd stop at this house. Usually had about 40 pupils in the summer, but it didn't amount to a great deal of money. But I can remember one gentleman had given me a check. It was for $8. And my mother had been in my room and cleaned my room, and when I went there, I couldn't find the check. Oh, I thought you know what I was going to buy? I was going to buy me a cerise petticoat, silk petticoat with that $8. I went rushing up to the bank, and I was crying. I said, oh dear, I've lost my mother's destroyed my check. And the banker, of course, knew me, and he let on like I'd lost that. But you know, he called the man up and he wrote me another check. But oh, I was so distressed.
So you got your petticoat.
I got my cerise petticoat. It was taffeta. It was just real, made a lot of, shush, shush, shush. Oh, dear. I can't think that anybody would ever be interested in anything that I haven't been too active in Monticello. In a way, nothing like my husband has been. But I came here and for some time had been so busy in our music indicator that we hadn't been very good churchgoers. But we did join the Methodist Church, and I did play organ there for about 12 years. And I was asked to join some of the clubs, bridge clubs, and I do love to play bridge, and I've met some very lovely ladies, and I think some of the nicest ladies that I've ever known live right here in Monticello. And
now, what year was it you moved to Monticello?
We moved here in 1917.
So you hadn't been married?
No, I was married in 1917. We moved here in 37.
So you lived in Decatur quite a while before
Yes,
you
we
moved here.
did. Yes, we built a nice home out on the west side of there, and we went in the theater, and we played vaudeville, and I went in as a relief organist and as the pianist with the orchestra, and we had vaudeville in those days. We'd have a picture, and we did play for silent pictures when they
now,
was.
Were all the scores different that you had to play?
Yes. They always, when most of the pictures that came in, they sent us a cue sheet, what we called a cue sheet, and it would give you a sample of what you should play for certain as it went through. There was always a love theme and a villain theme, and you had to. And the first time you played the show through, you would just watch that, and you would play extempore. You just make. I never used music for the first show. I would just make it up as I went along, but I always picked out a nice, pretty love theme, and so that's what after I'd been there a little while, I worked in the theaters.
Now, when you played in vaudeville, did you play?
I played with the orchestra, and then when the pictures came on, I played organ. And
who were some of the famous people that you met that we would know of?
Well, I one year.